Hello everyone, thank you for joining us at Maritime SoftwareHub, the People Podcast. Today I'm really excited to be speaking to Matthew Costello, who is the CEO and co-founder of Voyager Portal. Matt, welcome to the show. Really pleased to have you on and talking to you today. Thank you. Please can you briefly introduce yourself if that's okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Excited to be on the podcast and looking forward to having a chat today. So very nice to meet you all. I hope you enjoy the session today. My name's Matthew. I'm the CEO of Voyager. Started the company around 2018 with a former colleague of mine, Brett. And ever since then, we've been building out a global platform to help our customers manage their voyages and demurrage.
Excellent. It sounds like a very interesting journey, and I will get into it in a little bit. But we're mainly going to focus on how technology is impacting the world of demurrage and operations costs and the things associated with that. So we'll dive through that. But I mean, just looking at your profile, Matt, you've spent a lot of time in a whole range of different countries, from your graduate days, obviously, then when you started employment and things in shipping. So what's it been like working in a whole all around the world in different shipping markets, like in the Far East and now obviously Europe and now the US?
Yeah, I don't think there's a better industry if you want to potentially leave home and never come back. I
Yeah.
think not that that was particularly the intention, but I always loved traveling and I loved seeing the world and experiencing all the different cultures. And I didn't appreciate how much of a global career the maritime industry would present itself as, but it's really exceeded expectations. I left Australia back in 2009, and then the shipping industry took me to China, Singapore, the Middle East, the Netherlands, the US, and Switzerland. So it's been great. It's really exceeded expectations.
Fantastic. And what's the US? Obviously, you've been in the US now for a good 6-7 years, from what I can tell. What's the market like there at the moment compared to perhaps what you've experienced back in Europe and other areas?
Yeah, I think coming at it from a sort of technology standpoint, the market for software and related technologies in the US is second to none. It's an amazing place to build a software company. The culture around innovation, the willingness to adopt technologies and try technologies, broadly speaking, in the US is amazing. And obviously, you have access to venture capital funding and other forms of capital as well. But I think interestingly, for a maritime software company, USA isn't necessarily always people's first thought, right? You would think maybe some of the more maritime hubs like London and Singapore would be the key places, and I think they definitely are the key maritime hubs. I think Houston's close, but nowhere near as big of a maritime hub as Singapore and London. But in many ways, I think that was advantageous for us getting started. We were the only maritime software company in Houston, really. There
Wow.
were a few others, a bit more established in the kind of IoT space, but there was not really anyone doing what we were doing in Houston. So, you're kind of like the only person in town who's like building a company locally. And at the beginning, that was great for us. It gave us a lot of access to really amazing companies to work with. There wasn't a lot of competition down in Texas for a very long time. That's changed now. But I think it was a great market. I think now you're actually starting to see more maritime software companies coming out of the United States, even though it is a non-traditional hub. So I think on the West Coast, there's some really cool startups coming up in the domestic barging space and some really cool stuff using AI for vessel route optimization. So the maritime technology market and space in the US has grown tremendously in the last 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, very exciting. And yeah, and maybe you could tell us a bit about your background before you joined and obviously founded Voyager Portal. What type of things were you doing?
Yeah, so I joined the industry as a trainee ship broker for Stolt-Nielsen, which is chemical tanker vessel operator and owner. And I just started at the ground level, trying to fix ships and help out with operations as much as I can. And that was really, the first couple of years of my life. I was brand new to shipping. I didn't go to a maritime school or anything like that. So I was coming into it completely green. And I was fortunate back in those days, I had an amazing team of people around me who were extremely willing to help me learn and teach me as much as I was able to learn. And eventually that role kind of evolved, and it took me to the Netherlands to take on a larger role, working on sort of the Middle East region and some of the trade lanes out of the region. And still in chartering, predominantly most of my career was on the chartering side for vessel operators. And then lastly, I got relocated to the United States in 2016 as part of a large global reorg. Still doing chartering, but focusing more on the North America, South America, and India regions. So I would say predominantly it's been a very chartering heavy focused background with sort of demurrage and operations sprinkled in there throughout those 6 years.
Yeah, so I imagine a lot of that experience, there must have been events happening where you thought, you know what, there must be a better way to fix this, or you must have had a number of examples that involve kind of lay time and demurrage costs and time delay and that type of thing. So, what was it that prompted the kind of the shift into starting up Voyager Portal?
Yeah, so it wasn't a kind of single moment or anything. It was kind of a long series of learnings and evolution of thought that eventually kind of got to Voyager. I think the idea of this kind of epiphany and everything just suddenly makes sense, and you kind of boom, I'm going to make a company. Sure, that happens sometimes, but it was definitely not like that for me at all. Um, I had gotten to a point in my professional career that I felt that the really exciting learning curve that you experience in the maritime shipping industry was starting to sort of taper off. And I was, rather than developing more skills, I was developing a lot more knowledge.
Mhm.
And I really missed that kind of new skills learning kind of experience. And um, so I basically left the shipping industry and went and studied for a year. And I did an MBA, and I took a year off. And it was that year of taking a step back from the industry and now having time to look back at the industry to start recognizing where a lot of these inefficiencies and improvements could be made. And combined with that, being surrounded by a really diverse group of fellow students from,
Yeah.
consulting, oil and gas, manufacturing, pharmaceutical, investment banking, you name it, providing their own kind of unique perspectives on their industries and maybe all the amazing things those industries are doing or maybe not doing, that kind of made you realize, like, wow, like I was in this industry for 6 years, and I think being in the industry, I don't think I realized how many opportunities there were to leverage technology more intelligently. And I think coming back to the idea of this sort of gradual evolution of thought and gradual evolution of insight, it was kind of during the program having the time to think about it and the time to reflect made me realize there is something there. There is something
Mm.
big there that's still not being addressed. And it was eventually a summer project during that program where I got together with Brett, who is our co-founder, and he and I kind of got together and just spent kind of 3 or 4 months thinking really deeply about where there were some opportunities to really improve efficiency, better leverage data, make smarter decisions in the shipping industry. And a Voyager is eventually where we settled. And we started in 2018. But even in 2018, when we started, it was a shadow of its current self. It was the idea again was still not fully formed. So it's been a very sort of long journey to kind of get to where we are today, I'd say.
It sounds very exciting, and I mean, it's a perfect time for you. Maybe if you could please provide an overview of the solution, essentially the ways you're helping kind of your customers at Voyager.
Yeah, so we have two products. We have a voyage management solution and a demurrage solution. Uh, and today I'll focus mainly on the demurrage side of things.
Yeah.
And when we think of demurrage, we kind of look at the problem from a kind of a full life cycle management perspective. So one of the big problems for a demurrage analyst is simply collecting all the information needed to do a calculation. So before you even figure out how much is due, you need to review contracts, you need to look at voyage documents, you need to read statements of facts, you need to process emails. And so we're solving different parts of the problem along the supply chain, along the value chain. So that processing side of things, we've developed technology that uses machine learning and AI to extract the statement of fact data,
Okay.
organizes it, normalize it, and uses and auto populates calculation tools. So we've also developed another tool that is actually using a language model to read the contracts. So reading the contracts and turning clauses in those contracts, like a weather clause or a shifting clause or a tank readiness clause that may have demurrage implications, into logic a system can read. So before we even get to the calculation stage, we're using next generation technologies to help the analyst process this information, digitize this information, and get it into one place. And then the kind of next big step for analysts is the calculation side. And what we're doing there is we're again using a lot of that structured data we've created in the first step to then run these automated calculations that then also provide hints and tips back to the analyst of what clause has been applied to what addition or deduction, or what areas could they be potentially adding or changing their calculations. So it's a heavily automation assisted demurrage calculation experience,
Yeah.
which is dramatically speeding up the process for a lot of our analysts. And then the kind of back end of this process is the negotiations and settlements. So for the analysts, what we are developing is a whole new way to negotiate demurrage. So giving them every single tool at their disposal to negotiate the best outcome. So we're looking at providing them insights on historical negotiation statistics. I'm negotiating with a counterparty, and that counterparty typically likes to, buff up their claim amount by 20% every time, and they consistently drop 30%, or they love to negotiate on this clause, or anything we can give them to give them an edge, basically, to get the best outcome. And we're even looking at combining legal decisions, input from lawyers, arbitration results, to really kind of empower these analysts to have a huge, huge competitive advantage in their negotiations and settlements. Um, and that's kind of the second last piece where we're helping. And then the last piece is, now that we've captured all of this data through the life cycle of the demurrage process, how do we actually write better contracts? How do we schedule ships better? How do we plan our voyages more effectively? How do we budget better using this demurrage data? So kind of coming back full circle to the chartering and trading teams to give them the data from this demurrage tool to actually, figure out what are your clauses costing you. One of
Okay.
the things we've been able to do for a client is tell them the exact monetary cost of every single one of the clauses in their contracts over a portfolio of voyages. So next time they want to come up for negotiation, a chartering guy or a trader can say, hey, I know if I can amend this clause, I'm probably going to save us on average, $1 million a year in demurrage.
Brilliant. No, fascinating. And I guess just perhaps for our listeners that maybe are not familiar with the world of demurrage, and they maybe come from like another maritime technology platform provider that doesn't focus on this area. Can you just give a very quick kind of like a layman's overview of what demurrage is, and obviously like the day-to-day operations and where it factors into shipping would be really helpful.
Yeah, great question. So, from a technical standpoint, it's a liquidated damage. So, it is a fee that is incurred for spending excess time in port beyond what was allowed in the contract. So when we're explaining it to new employees at Voyager, I always like to use the example of Uber. If you call an Uber to your house and they might give you 2 minutes or 3 minutes of waiting time without charging you extra, but as soon as you keep that Uber waiting, you're going to be on the clock and you're going to start paying, and your total bill for that trip will be a fraction larger than what your initial estimate was. And that difference is demurrage. And so the concept in the maritime industry is not really any different. So these large ships have a certain amount of time in which they've agreed to load and discharge the cargo, and any time in excess of that is charged at an agreed rate. I think sadly, the demurrage function has sat at the kind of tail end of the shipping process. And typically demurrage claims are processed after the voyage is complete, and it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind, and no one wants to kind of think about the demurrage bills that might be coming. And that has created a lot of really bad habits in the maritime industry. And these kind of costs have been kind of like, pushed away, especially by the cargo owners and the charterers. And I think in the last couple of years, the freight rates have dramatically increased as a result. So has the demurrage fees associated. So it's traditionally been a very end of the voyage type process that a small function within the company would kind of have to deal with. And no one wanted to hear from the demurrage department because it was never good. If you've got your trading book or you've got your freight trading P&L, and the demurrage guys come tapping and say, hey, by the way, that voyage, you've got to add an extra $1 million to your books for demurrage. No one wants to hear that. And so I think what's changing now is we're starting to see the demurrage function shift from being a kind of, end of the voyage life cycle, out of sight, out of mind function in a lot of large companies to really being brought back to the center of trading and chartering and operations. And that's a huge shift, and that's a really important shift because if you think about it, it is the single largest variable cost in your voyage. You probably know what your freight rate's going to be, right? If it's on a lump sum or a per metric ton basis, you know roughly what your port costs are going to be. You might know roughly what your insurance, but there's this one big question mark, and it's your demurrage. And no one really ever knows what it's truly going to be. And you hope to God you're not going to get any, and everything's within allowed lay time, but you just never know. And so I think controlling for that risk by making demurrage more of a central part of how people work is a huge opportunity.
Okay, and is the goal to reduce the need to have a demurrage charge, so there's less delays in ports and waiting time, or is the goal maybe to have almost like a meter, so people will have live feeds? Okay, your ship has been in this port for this long, this is how much it's costing you live, and people can see that data. Do you think that's where it's going, or do you think that'd be very, very, there's too many moving pieces to try and have any kind of like very, very up-to-date information?
Yeah, so the up-to-date stuff's very doable, and it's being done now.
Okay.
So getting up-to-date demurrage feeds on current and potential demurrage risk is happening right now. We have dashboards that we can build for our clients that show them real-time updates as statement of facts are coming in or when voyage updates are coming in. So I think that's a very within grasp type thing to become the norm in a very short period of time. I think it will become very normal in the next 2 to 3 years that every company will have some kind of real-time demurrage dashboard that's adjusting as vessels come in and out of port. I think the end goal is we would love to eliminate demurrage. We would love for demurrage to not be a thing, and I think if we can achieve that, then that means that hopefully we have created a slightly more efficient global marine business and a marine supply chain. And there's so many ways you can try to reduce demurrage. There's things you can and can't control, but whether it's people scheduling their ships better, just-in-time arrival. There's a number of ways which you can reduce demurrage, but then there's other ways that are a little bit more complicated, like building port capacity, adding an extra dock to your terminal, adding extra
Mm.
storage capacity, so you're not sort of you've always got cargo available. And so these economic decisions are a little bit more complicated, but we believe that demurrage data and the data that we collect through demurrage will be extremely valuable to people when making those decisions. So, we've been working with a client that has been suffering from demurrage in a port, and they're trying to understand what is the real issue, right? Is it we need, and this is a break bulk sort of dry cargo client, and they're trying to figure out, is this an issue of the stevedores? Is this an issue of the ships we work at? They always seem to have cranes breaking down. Do we just need to put in an extra dolphin on our wharf so we can have an extra mooring line attached? Like all of these kind of physical world decisions can be really aided and accelerated with this data that we're collecting through the Demurrage platform. So, we hope that even though the system isn't in itself necessarily going to be the one, building an extra dock, it can at least inform the people who are going to make those investment decisions to make a quick decision and make an easy decision.
Yeah, and I guess also environmentally as well, it could have a huge impact on reducing emissions if your technology, for example, is helping streamlining the process and reducing time in port and things. It will ultimately help, hopefully, reduce emissions as well if they're hanging around the anchorage type of thing. So it all plays in nicely to the bigger picture towards net zero and thing, I think.
Yeah, it's one of many components of it, right? And it all goes into making a broadly more efficient, global maritime supply chain. And if you think about demurrage costs, we come back to this, point of excess time in port, right? But, it's not just time, it is the fuel that's being burnt, as you said. So if you think about these variable costs, the emissions costs of waiting, right? In the future, it's not just going to be your demurrage bill for that excess time in port. It's going to be your emissions bill, and there's a very good chance that the emissions bill could be even higher than the demurrage bill, right? Depending on the region you're in and the fuel restrictions and the emissions restrictions that might be native to that specific port that you're calling in. So there will be a day, I'm positive, in the near future where a demurrage analyst is, no longer a demurrage analyst, they're a claims analyst, and the claim is demurrage, but then you've also got this emissions claim because the ship spent an extra 4 days, burning fuel off the port somewhere.
Well, I mean, we're seeing it now, and a number of new opportunities and roles are coming up for emissions analysts and people that have experience in the emissions space and things and monitoring that. So I think it is very, very interesting and coming along quite quickly. Okay, brilliant. Well, I think, is there anything else you'd like to share about the company? And before I kind of dive into a few more questions about how you, like, what the journey was like, kind of starting the business and sort of scaling?
Yeah, well, just about us as a company, we're quite global, and for better or worse, we made the decision early on as a startup to be extremely global, pretty much from day one. And I think that's what they tell you not to do in the traditional startup playbook, is like you focus on one region and one area.
Yeah.
And we ignored that completely, and I think we had like multiple people in multiple regions almost immediately. And so we're about 40 employees, headquartered in Houston. Then we have a London office, a Singapore office, and a Brazil office. So, I've felt for a while that to really support the maritime industry, you need to have global coverage, especially when you're dealing with global customers that have, multiple offices themselves. It's very hard to do that from one region. So it's kind of like the cost of doing things in maritime is that you need to be global. Definitely makes it a lot harder to scale a big business and manage a global business, even though it's only 40 employees. But when you're distributed across so many different regions, it can definitely be a challenge.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And especially you typically want to be where the end user is as well. So if you're mainly selling to commodity traders and oil and gas traders, that type of thing, you want to ideally be where they're based, which I imagine is why Houston is such a hub for you guys. I would have thought, and maybe even Geneva and those sort of areas in Europe. But what were those first initial, like the first year or so of launching the business as a new founder? What was it like? Just the general
Yeah,
kind of challenges and the kind of the highs and lows.
I think it would make for like a very boring movie, is how
Okay.
I would describe it, because it was just like so tough the first few years to like one like figure out like the right problem to solve, and it's a continuing challenge. But the maritime industry is just so big, and there are so many problems to be solved, and there are so many opportunities that kind of drilling down on the right one is really tough.
Hmm.
So we spent a lot of time just talking to companies and just figuring out what is the right problem to be solving, and how are we going to solve it, and are we the right team to solve it. Um, Also raising money to keep the business afloat. 2018, 2019, maritime, a lot of people were like, what is this? And they'd be like, oh, like you do containers. And I was like, oh, no, no, no. Like we do non-containerized. We do like crude, dry
Mhm.
cargo, break bulk, gas. And they're like, wait, like I don't even know anything about this industry. And you would kind of explain it to people and they'd suddenly be like, holy cow, this is like a huge
Yeah.
market. And their eyes would kind of open. But in the first couple of years, it was like a lot of education of the investor market, of trying to kind of, and our first few rounds of investment were like very early stage angel investors and seed investors who kind of just took a punt on the market and took a punt on the founders. But it was super tough. I think we didn't really get, we started on this full time in 2018, but we didn't get a customer in the first year. Like we were just building, iterating, figuring out like what this is going to be. Um, and 2019, we started to get some customer traction, but it
Yeah.
was like very just like MVP, people willing to just give it a go. And it was a mess, and it was terrible, and the product was hopeless, and it was not great. And it wasn't really till 2020, actually, that third third year, which sounds like extremely slow, that we started to find a product that was clicking with the market. So it was very tough. It was much slower than I thought it would be. I think if we were to do it again, we'd probably do it in like a third of the time. But we were first time founders, so we quite frankly had no idea what we were doing. So everything took a little longer than we expected.
Yeah, no, it's really appreciate your honesty. Really, I mean, it must have been tough. I mean, we're to be honest with you, similar sort of time frame. We started, I started Core Development in 2019, and that year was okay. We did a little bit of maritime tech recruitment, but mostly it was hiring brokers or operators and analysts, that type of thing. And then 2020, we were really focused on the maritime technology space, and obviously 2020 to 2022, there was a lot of investment and a lot of companies were hiring and things. So we really accelerated, and now we're very, very focused on that area. So I think obviously companies do evolve over time, and they never really sort of stay on one path. You kind of you try avoid chasing the shiny penny type of thing, but yeah, we're similar in the way that it's been a very interesting road. But I mean, would you? I mean, going forward now, I mean, it seems like you're quite obviously quite close to the port, and it sounds silly, but like is in the port software space, from what we're seeing in sports, port technology is really growing. And
Mm.
do you think you would step into that side and trying to kind of integrate more with different ports? Well, I don't know, Port of Rotterdam, for example, try and have special collaborations with them, or is it still mainly very much focused on the charterers for the time being?
Yeah, for the time being, it's very focused on the charters, but we would be we are very keen. We are already talking to a number of the terminal operators and port operators about how we can share information. A lot of the data we collect provides really interesting benchmarks on how different terminals are performing within a port compared to each other. So, we process, aggregate, and normalize thousands of statement of facts. Those statement of facts are a proxy for how effective the terminal is, right? How quickly can it get ships in and out? How long is it taking for ships to berth? And we think that data can be really valuable for terminals to start thinking about how they can be more efficient, right? How they can be more competitive. So I think that's an angle there. And then also a lot of terminals generate data that is very useful for our customers, and vice versa. A lot of data in our system is very useful for terminals. We have data on, when ships are due to arrive. We have data on changes to their schedules and their itineraries, and all of that affects how a terminal in itself plans its docks and utilizes its docks. So I think there's a ton of synergies. I think as a sort of a terminal management software space, we have like no interest and have not really focused on that or looked at it in the past. But I think in terms of interfacing with terminals, being more collaborative with terminals and ports, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a real possibility.
And how about the ship owners themselves? Are you? I don't know if you already are. They're your client base as well, or is it just charterers predominantly?
Yeah, so our client base is predominantly charterers. When I say that, it's more than 80-90% charterers. However, we have a very collaborative element of our platform. So we have over 200 vessel operators that have access to our systems portal. So these are vessel operators that can log in to share documents with charterers, upload schedules with charterers, collaborate over voyage nominations, vessel nominations, all sorts of collaborative activities that are happening with these vessel operators. Now, they don't pay to use the system. As long as our charterer is a licensed customer, then they can provide access to those third parties. So we have a pretty significant network of companies that use Voyager on a daily and weekly basis that include ship owners, brokers, agents, and surveyors who collaborate through the system. So although they're not the core customer focused, we do have many that are users. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. I remember I used to work at Clarkson's between 2015 and 2019, and we used to help them hire a number of demurrage analysts and claims analysts and that type of thing. So I'm sure they would have been logging on to different, or we would have loved to be able to log on to different platforms and things like that.
Yeah. And I think a big sort of opportunity with Demurrage is that at the end of the day, there is a lot of just, paying each other and netting out as well. And, right now, a lot of these negotiations and settlements are all kind of being handled through different, accounts and payment portals and all that kind of thing. But I mean, if one of the goals of Voyager is we'd love to really try to get as much of this sort of claims settlement negotiation discussion happening through centralized systems, so we can actually just speed up the process, not just the negotiation and agreeing on a number, but actually getting paid. Right at the end of the day, ship owners want to get their demurrage bill paid as quick as possible, and the last thing that they want is a charterer spending an unnecessary amount of time, either because they're low staff or they lost the claim or they can't find it or it got hid in some kind of back office. So I think one thing we really see for this platform as well is by enabling the brokers and the ship owners eventually to be more part of it, we can actually speed up this whole payments process for everyone involved, right? It shouldn't take a $10,000 demurrage claim from a ship owner that is well trusted, that historically gives very accurate calculations and doesn't BS their claims, who you do hundreds of millions of business with, should not take $120 days to get their bill paid. I mean, that should be a 1 day thing with technology, right? And I think that's a huge opportunity because for the charterers, it costs money to process this stuff. It takes time. Every time there's a dispute, they have to go to a trader and they have to talk to the chartering and the ops, and that takes time. And then they have to hold this on their balance sheets. It's a payable. A payable is a liability on your balance sheet, right? That you have to cover with loans. So it's like the whole just having this kind of cash held up, whether it's a payable or receivable, is really inefficient for everyone. And I think looking at that, there are some huge opportunities to just kind of really cut through the noise and all right, let's get everyone paid. Let's move this process quickly. Let's not spend 90 days thinking about this $10,000 claim when at the end of the day, maybe the actual number was 9,950. Okay, well,
Yeah.
What did we gain by putting all this energy into this amount of $50? So.
And who's coordinating that dispute of the payment? Is it a broker? Is it some type of legal arbitrator type of thing, or is it themselves?
Yeah, so at the moment, it's usually just done either through a broker, or sometimes it's done directly with the counterparty. It really depends. We do see instances where lawyers will get involved, but they tend to be very large claims and very complicated claims that have a lot of kind of dispute areas that are gray. But the vast majority of demurrage claims never get to legal. The vast majority of demurrage claims get settled pretty quickly. But then a lot of them can just sit in kind of like hoppers, waiting to be processed. So I think in general, there are some really good opportunities there, and even for the intermediaries we speak to, so brokers we speak to who are often processing a lot of these demurrage claims on behalf of the charterers. And their goal as well is to process these claims quickly, because they often get their 2.5% on the demurrage as well. So there's a lot of benefit throughout the system to getting these things processed faster, more accurately, more timely, and in a more automated fashion. So
fantastic. And I think obviously technology is kind of the answer, and the right people implementing it. Which, I think wraps things up quite nicely. And unless there's anything you'd like to share, I'd love to sort of just dive a little bit more into about yourself, if that's okay, before we leave. But
yeah, of course. Happy to.
Yeah, cool. Well, I always ask this question, and I'd love to get to know you a bit better. But is there anything, any kind of hobbies or any kind of interesting things you like to do outside of the world of demurrage and shipping?
So we have a newborn kid. Young guy, Levi,
Awesome.
9 months old.
Oh, wow.
So that is kind of my hobby and my life right now. And that's been an awesome experience so far. And apart from that, I'm a big soccer player, football, which I learned the other day that soccer is a British term. The Brits actually started the terminology soccer. I listened to this really interesting sort of history of the term.
Wow.
And then they kind of left it to the Americans to adopt, and then now they make fun of them for using it, which is classic British. So I still play soccer as much as I can, and that's probably like my big kind of sporting love. So there's a team I play for here in Houston, and that keeps me fit and active, and I'm trying to fight off the urge of joining the over 40s teams and the over 30s teams. I'm trying to stick with the open young guys as long as I can. So got to try to stay fit.
Yeah, no, excellent. I mean, it must be pretty hot as well playing over in Houston, I imagine, unless it's indoors. But I wouldn't have thought it'd be aircon football. It'd be quite nice.
Yeah, no, it's it's quite often 32 degrees, 33, 34 degrees, 60, 70% humidity. So it is a killer out there in summer playing football. So yeah.
Wow, no, it's excellent that you're doing it, and good to keep that going. All right, Matt. Well, no, thank you so much for joining. And I really enjoyed this conversation. And I had a little bit of an understanding of demurrage and sort of the calculations and things, but this has really kind of helped me in particular. And I'm sure our audience will find it very interesting. So if anybody has any other questions or would like to obviously learn more about Voyager Portal and the platform, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. LinkedIn is always good. You can find me, Matthew Costello, Voyager. If you type that into LinkedIn, you'll find me, shoot me a message, connect with me. I'm on LinkedIn every day, and I'd be happy to kind of have a chat. We're always looking for great people to join the company. So by all means, reach out if you're excited in what we're doing, especially if you're from the industry and you've got a lot of demurrage experience. We love to try to bring that experience into the company as much as we can. Cool.
All right, Matt. Well, thank you so much for your time. And
thank
you again. Thank you to everyone as well for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thank you.